There are several great podcasts out there right now that focus on people who work behind the scenes of theater. And today I'm excited to bring to you a conversation that I had with the host of Beyond the Spotlight, Jon Diener. Welcome to the Backstage Creative. My name is Krista Copper. I love theater so much. And in January of 2021, I miss it so very much. I miss being in the pit, and I've been listening to a lot of theater soundtracks lately. Of course, been listening to a lot of Hamilton, and just before sitting down to record this, I was listening to Hadestown, Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, also frequently played in my house. And I cannot wait to be back in the pit. I cannot wait for theaters to be open again. I've been really struggling to get my bass out of the case lately. If you're one of those people who I'm seeing on Facebook and Instagram who are just, pounding out content and creating all these videos and writing blog posts and doing albums, I mean, my hat is off to you, because I have not been able to be that productive. I just have not had the capacity to do that. Really, when I get out my bass, it just makes me sad, because I realize how much I miss it, and I realize how much I miss people working with other musicians and other artists, and working on a show and having gigs in the calendar. And so whenever I have gotten my bass out, the past several months, it's just kind of put me in a weird headspace. And so around last fall, I said, let's just take a break. Let's take that pressure off of myself to try to feel like I need to be producing something during this time that's so difficult. But lately I just got out my bass today, and it was wonderful. I signed up to play at the International Society of Bassists convention that's held every 2 years. This year they're going to do it virtually. I have some music that I wanted to present, and so I've started to work on that. It's nice to have a goal again. It's nice to have something, a deadline on the calendar, that I need to, get a video of this music produced. With that being said, if you are one of those people that's struggling to be an artist, struggling to be creative, and then feeling bad when you get on social media and you're seeing all these people that are just killing it right now, that are using this time to be so productive, like you're not alone in that. I think there are a lot of us that are just, it's been hard, and everyone handles a global pandemic differently. And for some people, they get through it by practicing and going to the woodshed and updating their website and doing all these things. And then there are other people like myself that that makes me even more sad and even more down. And if that's encouraging to you, I hope it is, because I know sometimes I get discouraged, because I just really have not been productive from an artistic sense lately. So if you're in that boat with me, you are not alone. Please don't feel discouraged if you have not been super creative during this very odd time that we're living in. Like I said in the introduction, the intro to the intro, today is my conversation with Jon Diener. Jon hosts a podcast called Beyond the Spotlight. It's similar to the Backstage Creative, but Jon also interviews people who work in the music and entertainment industries. So people who go out on the big, Justin Timberlake tours and do things like that. But he does also interview people who work behind the scenes of theater. I've had other people on the show who have similar podcasts. I know I've interviewed Corey Paddock of the N1 podcast, Maddie Henry of Standing By. If you feel up to it, check out what those people are doing with their shows. And if you haven't listened to their interviews yet, feel free to go back to back in the archives of the Backstage Creative and check out their interviews, because both of them were fantastic guests on this show. Here we go. Here's my conversation with Jon Diener.
Much as I am not liking winter as I get older, I don't think I could live in a climate where it never changes seasons. I need that change every 3 or 4 months because I don't know if I get bored with it, or I don't know. It makes me appreciate the other seasons more after, I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, I had a friend who lived in Chicago for many years and then they moved to San Francisco, so pretty stable
Mm.
climate and they at first they loved it, but then yeah, after a while they were like, I just need a season. Like I need a
Yeah.
different season.
Yeah, I have always dreamed of, just for the weather alone, moving to San Francisco. God knows I could never afford it, but um, yeah, I wonder if I would get bored with it, even though it was nice. But
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
We're stuck here in the Midwest, and
Are you where what part are you in Michigan?
yeah, I'm in
Yes.
southern Michigan, like about as far south from Detroit as you can get before you're in Ohio. So
Okay.
very near Toledo, actually, Ohio.
Do you get pretty severe winters? Like I think of Michigan as just getting slammed during winter.
Not so much here. I mean, I'm like 5 or 6 miles from Lake Erie, so
Mm.
we're generally spared some of the real heavy stuff. Once in a while, we'll get a weird storm system that kind of comes off Lake Erie, and if that's the case, then it will dump a lot of snow. But the prevailing winds here are kind of out of the west, northwest. So, like over on the other side of the state, like Grand Rapids and Muskegon, and over there, they get a lot of the lake effect stuff, and then further north, obviously, they get more snow. But it's not bad. Although I remember as a kid getting a lot more snow than we have in the last 10 or 15 years. It was unseasonably seasonably cold today, if that makes sense. It's been like 40 degrees here most of the winter so far for highs, and that's kind of unusual. It's usually about 30 or 28, and we usually have snow on the ground by mid-January, but it's not doing anything this year.
Yeah, so I live in Kansas City and it seems like we've had a pretty mild winter so far. So I'm like I kind of have this feeling of dread of like, okay, when
Yeah.
is it coming?
It's going to make up for it later.
Yeah. um I'd love to hear about your background, where you grew up, how you got into music, and if you went where you went to school, if you went to school, and just kind of the general trajectory of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. So I grew up as the youngest of four brothers. They were a few years older. There was three of them, like within 3 years, and then like almost 7 years, and then me. So I guess I was kind of an afterthought or a mistake or whatever. But so in a sense, I was almost like an only child because I had so much age difference between them and me. And like by the time the next oldest brother was leaving for college, I think I was like 10, 11, 12, something like that around. So from then on, I was basically, at home by myself with the parents. So, and frankly, I think by the time they all moved out, my mom, especially, and my dad were just so tired from them that they just like, do whatever you want to do. Basically, they didn't say that, but that was the feeling. I remember always being interested in music from a real young age, and I don't know like an exact time, but I grew up in southeastern Michigan. We were about an hour from Detroit, and there was a radio station across the river in Canada, in Ontario, called CKLW. And if anybody is in the region that's older like me will remember that was like the powerhouse station in the region. Like you could pick it up, on a clear night. It was AM. You could pick it up hundreds of miles away, and they played, just an amazing assortment of music. And I was, starting to be aware of music at, whatever age you are, 4, 5, 6, something in there. And, so that was mid to late 60s. And so, it was the prime Motown era. It was, a lot of that 70s pop rock kind of stuff that was out. And on CKLW, you could listen for an hour and you'd hear the Supremes, and then you'd hear Kansas or Edgar Winter, or just this really vast variety of stuff. And so all that appealed to me, and I remember the first time I really like moved toward pursuing playing an instrument was I think I was about 8 years old, and my mom had a friend, and I don't know all the details of this, but basically my mom traded an antique mirror for an acoustic guitar that this woman had that I guess nobody in their family played or didn't want it or something. And so I ended up with this acoustic guitar at 8 or 8.5, whatever it was, and just started kind of messing around with it. But I I did have a pretty good sense of music. Like I didn't have perfect pitch. I wasn't like some kind of prodigy or anything, but I just gravitated towards music and listened, I think, especially at that age, at a level that most 8-year-olds weren't listening to music. I wasn't really like analyzing the music, but I was definitely paying attention more, to different things than other people were. Like, and especially as I got older, I found myself, when a song would come on, I'm either following the bass part or the background vocals or, just different things. Most people are just singing the song or whatever. And there's a lot of popular songs that I don't even know the words to because I never really paid attention to that part of it. I mean, I don't know if it was because that was like the obvious choice, to do, and I just wanted to be contrary or what, but I always was more intrigued by the other stuff that was going on kind of around that. So I started to kind of mess around with this acoustic guitar. And I think about a year later, I started taking lessons. And of course, this is way before YouTube or the internet, even, and so it was a very cut and dried kind of thing. You had to buy this Mel Bay book or whatever we were using, and it was very regimented, and you learned this note this week. And, it just kind of went too slow for my taste. And I wasn't interested in scales. I wanted to, play a song like most kids did. So I think after about 6 months, I told my mom, this is silly to spend the money on this. I'm not really enjoying it. I just kind of want to learn stuff on my own. And then, shortly after that, I think when I was in 5th grade, I started in the band program, played tenor sax. And um, I remember figuring out like our high school's fight song, like within a couple days of having the instrument, just sitting at home. Like, nobody taught it to me. I didn't really know anything about theory. I didn't even really know the right key probably, but I just started playing a couple notes and then I was like, oh, this goes like that, and just kind of, and so I was always kind of just trying to learn things on my own and do things a lot by ear, skip all the gory details, but eventually I learned music theory and I learned the things behind what I kind of knew, but I just didn't know what they were called or how they fit together at an early age when I would kind of play songs or listen to songs and learn them or write songs that I knew there was a relationship between certain chords. Like, if a song started on an A major chord, there's a good chance the next chord is going to be a D major chord or an E major. There were these chords that just always were together, and I, didn't understand at that point that it was, a 1 4 5 progression or whatever. But it was fun later to kind of learn the math and the science, if you will, behind all that stuff and the theory of it. Because then it just made so much more sense to me at that point because I understood why those things went together. That's a long answer to your question, and I'm still only up to 5th grade, I think, or something. But so again, I was bored partway through 5th grade with tenor sax because at that point, I think it was like 2 days a week that we met for this band class, and it was only like, I don't know, 30 or 40 minutes. So, half the class would be used up by kids just trying to get their horns out and put them together. And, it just didn't really get a lot of individual attention and it wasn't really moving along, for my taste. So again, I told my mom, you know what, you're paying rent on this horn every month or whatever. I don't think I want to do this anymore. I was still playing guitar, on my own at home. And I thought, well, I'll just do that. Well, then at the start of my 6th grade year, don't worry, I'm not going to cover every year in detail. um, the first couple of weeks of school started and I was sitting there in class and there's a knock on the door and the band director for that school, because it was a different building and a different school at that point, asked to see me. And I'm like, oh, what's going on here? And he said they were looking to start someone on bassoon because, it's not a starting instrument you would do right out of the gate at a young age. But they wanted to start somebody on it for sixth grade. And he said, now, it's a very challenging instrument and you're going to have to take private lessons if you're going to do it because, that's the level you need to be. And I'm like, oh, okay, sure. Sounds great. Not really fully understanding how difficult any double reed instrument is, but I did take lessons and I did actually enjoy the instrument. And, looking back on it, I ended up playing it all through high school until I graduated. Um, and I loved the instrument because of its kind of vocal range, I guess is a good way to say it. I always equated that and cello as kind of in this range that kind of mimic the human voices.
Mhm.
And I always was interested in cello too, but we didn't have a orchestra program at our school, so it was just band. And I think that's why I ended up there. But yeah, I played bassoon up through high school. Also played sousaphone in marching band in high school, mostly because you can't really march with a bassoon very well. Um, I was still playing guitar. I was, by middle school, I was starting to do, the garage band thing with other kids, and played guitar for that. And then in high school, the band director wanted somebody to play bass guitar in the jazz band, so I did that one year, and then I played, I think, guitar one year, and it was all, kind of depending on who else they could get that could play one or the other. Played in the show choir, played bass for that for a couple of years. Music was a pretty big part of, middle school, high school years. In the back of my head, I was always thinking, I'm going to keep doing music because this is what I love to do. But in those days, late 70s, there really weren't a lot of options for college degrees in terms of music. Like it was either music education or get a performance degree. And I didn't have the willpower and the patience, I guess, to work hard enough at bassoon to really do anything with that, on a professional level. So I said, well, I'll just do my next other favorite thing, which is technical field, electronics and engineering, and actually, what I really wanted to do was work in a recording studio. I think I was always fascinated with electronic things and the marriage of that with music and combining those. In fact, going backwards here for a second, in fifth grade, one of our assignments was to write a story, about anything we wanted to, basically, and we had to illustrate a couple pictures, and that was like the end of the year project or something. And I wrote a story about these kids that were friends that wanted to, they had a little band or whatever, and they wanted to record a record, and they like mowed lawns all summer to raise money, and then they went to a recording studio. And this is at 10 years old, so I always kind of had that in the back of my head. And then after I went through college and got an engineering degree, did end up working at a small studio, not far from where I lived. And it was kind of a one person operation. And so he needed somebody else to kind of help him do some things and take some of the load off of him. And I knew quite a bit. And in some cases, I think maybe I even knew a little more, at least in the technical realm, than he did. But it was a good learning experience because I learned kind of how to deal with clients and how to run a session and, other things that I didn't really have a lot of experience with. But I really loved doing that. And I think that was maybe 4 or 5 years I was there. And we did things like demo tapes for people, or we did 45s and albums and a lot of jingles for commercials, a lot of like corporate AV soundtracks, which, again, back in this time was before digital of any kind. So it was recording to tape, cutting it with a razor blade and a grease pencil, and taping it together, and that was that. But it was fun. And then the place that I was working there, a couple years after I started, the guy that owned it wanted to get into video production, and so he bought some gear and started setting that up, and I helped him get that started, and so we kind of did both things for a couple years, and then I ended up leaving there after a while. Got together with some previous clients that were from an ad agency, and we started our own video production company. And I basically have been doing that since 1985, all the while playing music on the side and on weekends and so forth. In retrospect, doing music as a quote unquote hobby. I mean, I've been paid to play music since I was 15 or 16, but I wouldn't call myself a full time professional musician in that regard because, it's not my primary source of income. But I think to do it as a hobby, it's become more enjoyable for me because I don't have to rely on it solely to live on, if that makes any sense.
Hmm.
Um, and especially in the area that I'm at, if I were in a large market, there would probably be a lot more work for me to maybe support myself. But where I'm at, kind of in between large cities, it's just not as viable. I mean, there are some people that are doing it, but it's tough to raise a family and put kids through college. Sometimes doing that, so that's kind of the long answer to a very short question. I'm sorry, I kind of rambled on there.
No, I think it's my opinion that podcasts were made for rambling. So anytime people apologize for rambling, like no, like that's
Yeah,
what podcasts are for, just for rambling.
yeah. You can always edit stuff if you want, I guess, right?
Yeah. Yeah. When you're involved in theater, like if you when you're involved with theater, are you playing in the pit? Are you doing like sound stuff? What does that look like whenever you have a theater gig?
Generally, with theater stuff, it's always playing in the pit. I got a call from a friend who was a teacher at a high school, and this is like 15 years ago or so, and he said, we're doing a musical and we need a bass player. Do you want to do it? And I had played in a jazz combo with him, around that time. So he said, can you read music? And I'm like, yeah, I can read music. So it was kind of the entry into the pit orchestra thing, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun for me because I got to practice my reading chops a little more, which had kind of gotten stale since high school. And it was fun to play in a larger setting, other than just four or five people wailing away in a garage on guitars, and just kind of making things up. Yeah, it was fun to get back into that. And then slowly, I think I only did, one or two shows, for couple years. And then I would slowly, meet somebody in one of the pits and they'd say, "Oh, are you interested in playing for this thing?" And I'm like, "Okay," and then slowly it would kind of build up until, before COVID and things kind of got shut down. I think I was probably doing 15 to 18 shows a year. And, a lot of these are just one or two weekend things. So that it's not like, I was working every weekend necessarily, but yeah, it's mostly pit stuff. I've done other things, recording some things or doing videos of certain performances, but those are just kind of one-off things that came about from contacts that I had with people. But yeah, the pit thing, and part of it, the reason that I really got more involved with theater was as I got older and had been playing in and around bars or wedding receptions or just every kind of conceivable thing for the public for 30, 40 years. I was really getting tired of the whole scene in terms of the late hours, the low pay, putting up with crazy people and drunk people and all that kind of stuff, and schlepping gear in, schlepping it out the same night. And once you get to a certain age, you just don't want to deal with that anymore. And so the theater thing started to seem, much more attractive as I went along. It's like, okay, I can go set up my stuff on a, Sunday. We do our rehearsal. We, leave everything up for the week or 2 weeks, whatever. Come back, tear it down. There's nobody tripping over my stuff or falling into me in the pit usually. Uh, and then the pay was okay, for what it was. And I got to be around other, really good players and meet a lot of new people. So that was a fun benefit of it as well, because it really, the music business, like pretty much everything else, is all about networking and who you meet and getting that next referral for something else. And you never know who may be around the corner, or who may know somebody that you meet, and it may lead to a gig down the road. So, but yeah, that's kind of how I landed with the theater part of it. That was just seemed really attractive to me, and the more I do it, the more I enjoy it. And I'll tell you, it's really been painful for the last going on 11 months, 10,
Yeah.
10 and a half months or whatever it is. So I did get to do one show. I think it was early October. It was a one weekend thing at a college, and we were all, fully masked and all kinds of safety protocols, and kept our 6 feet of distance in the pit. But man, it was like, in some ways it was like I had never stopped doing shows, but in other ways it was like, what, which end of the bass do I blow in? I don't understand. I can't remember how this worked. Um, so yeah, it was fun to get back and do it. And I've got a couple other things on the books coming up in the spring, so we'll see if the trending works out in terms of the pandemic, that those things can actually happen again, and we can start getting back into it slowly and safely.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's hard not to get to create that magic and feel the audience excitement, and
Yeah, yeah.
streamed performances are just not the same.
Right, right. And I did get a chance to do a couple virtual performance things with some people, which were cool. But yeah, it's just not the same at all. I mean, to be in a room with another live human and actually play music and feed off that energy from each other and from an audience, and singers or performers, it's just, there's nothing like it. There's no substitute for that. I always used to joke with people that I play music on the weekends. I'd work all week. I ran my own business for years and years, put in a lot of hours. I had kids that were involved in things, and I drove them around. I just was very busy, and a lot of hours in the week. And I would go play gigs on weekends, and people go, "Man, aren't you like exhausted? How do you have the energy to go do this?" And I like, this is my therapy. This is what gets me through
Yeah.
the rest of the week, and
Mhm.
doing all the other things that are so stressful. Because when I can go play music and get immersed in that, it erases everything else, and it like resets everything. And I would joke about it to people, that it's my therapy. But I'll tell you what, by the time we got to about June or July of 2020, I was already starting to notice like a change in my own personality and my own
Mhm.
demeanor, because I wasn't around other musicians. I wasn't playing music with people. And it was surprising in a way, because I knew it was a beneficial thing to do, but I just didn't realize the real scale of it until that time had passed without doing it. It's a struggle. And I told somebody else recently, we were talking about the pandemic and quarantine and being away from people. And most people would think, most musicians, well, this is, a perfect time to spend a lot of time, woodshedding and really practicing, and taking advantage of this time and really improve my skills. And I have been almost like the opposite of that.
Yeah.
It's really hard for me. Kind of going back to what I was talking about as a kid learning instruments. If I don't have like a purpose and an end result or a goal, like a performance or something, I just don't get too motivated to practice. I'm not certainly not the kind of part of it's probably from not having a classical training, but I am not a guy to sit down and just play scales for a half an hour or, do anything kind of regimented like that. I mean, I know I should. It would probably improve my technique immensely, but that just doesn't do it for me. I don't know. I don't, I would much rather just play along with a song or just improvise or do something that has more of a visceral feel to it, I guess is the way to say it. I don't know. So it's it's been tough in that regard that I haven't really spent as much time on electric or upright in this time period because of it's like, well, I don't have a gig, so I don't really need to like work on any new songs or work on a musical or that kind of stuff. So it's at first it was kind of like, I can take a little break and not have to worry about it. But the more that time passes, I'm starting to kind of worry myself like, man, you better get back at it and get your your fingerings back and your muscle memory back because when the time does come, and it will be soon, hopefully, that I'll have the skill set there.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. I I don't know how people who are posting all these YouTube videos, I don't know how they're doing it. Like I pick up my bass and it kind of makes me sadder, cuz then
Right.
it's just like what do I this isn't right. This isn't how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been really struggling with motivation and for a while I thought, okay, just get your bass up for 20 minutes a day, but I just couldn't keep up with that. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, it's hard. It's hard. It's hard to be
Yeah.
motivated during this.
Yeah. And God bless the people that can do that and that can stay focused. I have a good friend who's a percussionist, and he is posting videos all the time, working through these technique books and these exercises, and he's I did these pages today and blah blah blah. And it's like, man, hats off to you. You've got way more initiative than I do in terms of that stuff. And yeah, I mean, I think it's just a personal thing for everybody. Some
Mhm.
people thrive in that part of it, and some, like me, just that doesn't get me as excited. I mean, there's a certain physical level that you have to reach. The ability to get around on the instrument that you have to keep in shape. But yeah, in terms of like the rote playing, I just doesn't do it for me. And I know there's probably a lot of musicians that would say, oh well, you're really not taking this seriously, or you're never going to improve, and they're probably right in some manner in both cases. But I guess at this point, I know what things I want to accomplish, musically, and I think I'm close enough to that I'm comfortable that I don't have to kill myself for 2 hours a day trying to be the best guy in New York or whatever, that kind of thing. I'm not. I'm way past doing any of that kind of thing, and I have no delusions of being a virtuoso at this point. Not that I ever was a virtuoso.
Yeah, I with like the new year just happening, I was like reflecting over 2020 and yeah, it's hard to look back and be like, "Oh, I should use that time more effectively or I should have done this or should have
Hmm.
done, develop my YouTube channel more or
Yeah.
something." But I think I don't know, I think we have to have grace with ourselves cuz like I just like mentally and emotionally, I think a lot of us just don't have the capacity to do super creative things and to do that and I think you have to let that go,
Yeah.
and be okay
Right.
with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, life things can come and go and get in the way. And I've had a kind of a trying 6 months or so with some family members with major health issues, and I just lost my mom about a week ago. So it's been, there's a lot of other things that are vying for your time and attention and energy that can detract from getting enough time with your instrument. So yeah, I think you're right. I think you need to give yourself grace with that and be okay with, you don't have to be like a machine and accomplish X, Y, and Z every day or whatever. Because if it doesn't feel authentic and you're not feeling the passion to do it, then it's probably not going to be very productive time,
Mhm.
if you do it. Again, other than just basic mechanical ability with your hands and fingers. I always like to have, some motivation to practice or to learn something new. Like, I hear a song and it's like, oh, that's a cool little rhythm or a cool lick. And then I'll, pull out the bass and learn that. And then it kind of registers more, I think, with me when I want to know something and I go find out, than if I were just told, here's a thing, when I'm not necessarily ready to receive that information. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Um, so that's the kind of learner I am, I guess. And other people probably are different, but I've always been that way. When it's like I almost don't want to know things unless I have a need for it,
Hmm.
because like there's too much stuff in my head uh, there's not enough room up there, so I have to kind of limit what I take in so I can try to have any hope of keeping it in there. But but yeah, music has always been a huge part of me, and performance stuff. Whether it's in theater or in a a band setting or whatever, or recording even for that matter, have always been really interesting to me, because the performance, or well, yeah, I guess is an umbrella term. The performance is a way of, it's a conduit to get that music that's in you, whether it's coming from a written page or just from your own improvisation. But that's the conduit that gets it to the listener. And if you don't have that pipeline flowing with something, it's kind of just bottling up there, and it's not doing anybody any good if it's just staying within you.
Hmm.
um, you've got to kind of share that. And I think art in general is not nearly as effective, or effective at all, if it's not shared with somebody. I mean, that's the whole idea of it, right? It's, if you're an artist and you're painting and you never show it to anybody, yeah, you've seen it, but you kind of already saw it in your head before you even made it. So did you really do anything? And the same with music. If you, are practicing in your basement, or you are, writing things, but you never share it with anybody, then I think that's kind of a wasted resource. I think, that's the whole idea. Even if it's not something you're particularly proud of, or, you don't think is the best you've done, somebody's probably going to like it. I mean, I've done some things that I was almost embarrassed to let anybody hear, not because they were bad, just because it was, it was something that was a little more personal, or just something that I didn't think, was quite at the level of other people. And people surprise you and they say, oh yeah, that's really interesting, I like the way you did this or that. And so you have to try to not self edit yourself sometimes too, and kind of be your own worst internal critic and filter, because that can lead to missing out on some creative things or some fun opportunities. I've always been super guilty of that. Just like, oh, nobody will want to hear this, or I better not do this because nobody will like it, or this is dumb, or I'm not gonna reach out to this person to get a possible gig because they might think I'm just whatever. So when you get that way, you just immediately cut off any of those opportunities before you even have a chance to find out if they're going to go anywhere. So I'm working on that for the last several decades, trying to not talk myself out of things that may or may not work out, but at least I will find out for sure if they do. And that's kind of the segue into my podcast. That's kind of how that came about. I mean, it was one of those things I had thought about for a while, and I always kind of talked myself out of it. Like, well, who's going to want to hear me talk? And I don't know. Do I have anything really different to say? And blah, blah, blah. Finally, one day, I think I might have been listening to another podcast, and I thought, you know what? If, if all these other people can do this and get somebody to listen, why can't I do it? So I started to kind of get some ideas together, and just slowly start it out and build it up. And not that it's anything amazing right now, but it's definitely surprised me in terms of the acceptance and the places that people are listening to it. I don't know about you, but I have listeners in multiple countries, and I don't know how they find out about my little podcast that I started, but it's just cool. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying about you never know who's going to be interested in and value your work or your art until you put it out there and see. And yeah, you'll probably get a couple people that'll be the hecklers and the negative people, but yeah, you don't have to take their word for it. So, and you've been at it what, a couple years, so you've, I'm sure, gotten some good response from people in terms of the kind of subject matter and the topics that you're covering.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Yeah, when did I start this? 2018.
Wow.
But yeah, there's a author by the name of Seth Godin, and he talks a lot about
Hmm.
creative work, and
Hmm.
he has frequently said, it doesn't count unless you ship it. Like it doesn't count,
Yeah.
as art or creativity until you share it. I don't know if I 100% agree with that, but I think he has a valid point. Like, you can sit around on all these great ideas, but until you share them, until you use them to help other people and serve other people, then it doesn't count.
Yeah, right. No, and I totally agree with that. I mean, were you hesitant at first to start the podcast? I mean, were you in that same situation like I was, where it was, will anybody listen to this kind of thing, or did you just think, I'm just going to go ahead and do it?
I wasn't as concerned with people not listening. Um, at the time when I started, I couldn't really find another podcast who was doing, talking to stage managers and pit musicians and music directors. And so I saw that there was an opportunity. So it wasn't
Hmm.
so much of, will anyone care? Like, I knew there was a whole bunch of people who worked behind the scenes that were maybe, underrepresented and usually underappreciated. It was
Yeah.
more of like my own insecurity of like talking. I mean, I'm a musician for a reason. Like
Right.
I
Right.
I like to communicate through music. Like, language frustrates me to no end.
Yeah.
So it was more of like putting something out there that people could criticize, right? Because I mean, my name's on it, so it's, if
Sure.
they don't
Yeah.
like it, But yeah, I think it was more of like, who am I to do this? And I'm just this bass player from Kansas who like.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a lot of what I struggled with. Not only with the podcast, but with a lot of things in music. And I mean, honestly, almost every pit that I play in, every show, I'm sitting there looking around at other people, who are music instructors, music educators, lifelong musicians, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't belong here. Like, they're going to find out that I'm not as good as them, or that I'm not as serious, or something to that effect, and they're just going to kick me out. It's like I don't know why I think that, but that's always, I always feel like I'm the odd person out in the pit, because it's like everybody else has studied and learned and crafted their skill set, and I'm just this guy that thumps on the bass. And I again, I'm going back to the self-regulating, self-filtering thing there, but it's a struggle. I mean, it's part of, I think everybody has a certain element of that in their personality,
Mhm.
some more than others. Although I've met a few people who have no reservations about their own abilities, and they'll be glad to tell you about that. It's hard to just put things out there on a personal level as an artist, because, like you said, your name is associated with it, and it's hard to not connect your work or your art with your person. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? So
Yeah.
if somebody doesn't like the song you wrote, or the piece you played, or the sculpture you made, it doesn't necessarily mean they don't like you as a person. It just means they're not enjoying that art. And that's okay. It's not, you're not going to make something that everyone is going to love every time. So that's another challenge that I've been, struggling with all for quite a while, just trying to separate those two things and make it less of a, if there is any kind of criticism or feedback, to not take it personally, just because it's not really directed at me as much as it is whatever it is that they're criticizing.
Hmm. I always view it as like a floor. Underneath the floor is like my self worth and who I am as a person, and everything above that is like music and art and criticism. Like you can't allow, like, no one can go below that floor.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's how I try to get over it. It's just like, nope, like there's a part of me that is untouchable
Hmm.
and that's separate from this, and that's my self-worth and my dignity. And
Yeah,
um
yeah. Nobody can change that.
mhm.
And that's, that's a struggle that some people do allow others to change that, or value what that is or isn't, when they have, really no no reason, or no right to do that, I should say. That, that kind of goes back to, one of the reasons that I started my podcast was, similar to you. It was like, I thought, I'm interested in all these things that are going on behind the scenes. And I guess now that I'm thinking about it, it kind of connects back to with what I said earlier about listening to music when I was younger, about always kind of picking out the not obvious parts and kind of focusing on those. Maybe this is kind of, an evolution of that, where, there's all these people doing things, behind the stage or under the stage or wherever, that are, working hard, that are just as important as the people in the spotlight, and yet they're not getting the attention and the recognition and the respect that, they probably deserve. And, my show is similar to yours, but I cover more of like the music, like live shows and concerts and things, as well as a little bit of theater. I have done a couple, I think, in more of the TV realm, trying to just cover really all the entertainment areas, and focus on people that are, the initial thing was, I'm interested in this, I wonder if anybody else is.
Mhm.
It was kind of a, selfish adventure, I guess, but
Me too.
a lot of people are really interested in it, and they're like, and even people I've interviewed have said, I'm so glad you're doing this, thank you for doing this, I think a lot of people really need to hear about, XY, whatever. And always surprised, in a way, because it's just nice to hear that kind of, affirmation, I guess, of what it is that I'm doing, and the fact that, yeah, there are people out there who are hungry for this kind of information, that, like you, I'm kind of surprised there wasn't more of this out there. It's fascinating to hear some of these stories from people, in different areas, that are just not surprising necessarily, but just, the detail of something that you just never really think about. For instance, I interviewed somebody who was, a tour accountant, and, for like a major rock tour, or, and, how many people, when they go to a concert, sit there and think, I wonder who's, settling the show at the end of the night, or who's, counting the money, or, that's just one of those things nobody ever thinks about. But like, it literally is one of the most important things of the show. And, so it's neat to hear all these things again, because I'm curious, and I hope that when I'm curious, it's kind of a genuine thing that comes across when I talk to people, and maybe that's, what makes it interesting to listen to, I guess. I don't know. It's always kind of shooting in the dark, I think, when you're doing these, because you never really know. I mean, you have certain metrics that you can see, from your hosting site, that tell, how many downloads there are for an episode or whatever. But you don't always hear much feedback, or at least I don't know, maybe you do. But,
No.
I kind of ask people politely at the end of shows, to let me know if you liked something, or you didn't like something, or if you've got an idea for a guest, or, whatever. And rarely do I really get much interaction other than, maybe a few friends who listen to it. I guess when I think about me as a listener of other podcasts, I guess I'm kind of the same way. Like I don't always engage with the podcasts that I listen to. I listen to them kind of as a consumer and kind of think of it more of as a one way street. Like, they're delivering a
Mhm.
product and I'm taking that. But, with the advent of social media, I think that's starting to change a little. I think there's more opportunity for people to kind of connect back and forth with that. And so hopefully that'll open things up a little bit to make it more flow of information both ways.
Yeah, definitely. I think too, like even people who work in so like take the theater industry. I think even people who work in the theater industry aren't always they don't always understand what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
I mean, especially musicians, we're some of the last people hired for the show. We come in, the final few days. Like I didn't know there was a bunch of people who like there's this whole hierarchy of like painters and
Ah,
the different people who have different jobs relating to painting. My hope with my podcast is also to educate the people in the industry of what everyone is doing and what kind of language they use. And I think, yeah, the more you understand what's going on around you, the better the product will be, and the more compassion you'll be able to have for people when you're sitting in tech week or sitting in a tech rehearsal and there seems to be nothing happening. Well, the lighting designer is doing all of his designs during tech week, and so that's why you're sitting there.
yeah.
So
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And there's a lot of it that I don't know either. I'll have to listen to more of your shows so I can find out. But it is interesting how, especially as musicians, because I always feel, here I go back to the imposters thing, but it feels like the musicians, we're just kind of coming in at the end. Everybody's done all this hard work up until this point, for weeks and weeks. And we just kind of drop in there and play and see you later and go. And we don't get as emotionally invested, I don't think, in the production as a whole. I mean,
mhm.
to a certain degree, but and we don't always have that interaction with other crew members and certainly cast members for the most part. It's a weird kind of a symbiosis. We're there and we're an integral part of the show, but yet sometimes we're almost kind of treated like stepchildren. Like, we're, you guys just stay over there and don't bother anybody and don't eat all the
Uh-huh.
snacks during intermission. But but it is cool. I've done a couple shows where it was a small let's see what was like, one of them was Next to Normal. I don't know if you've ever played the show, but really a very heavy show, a lot of really kind of serious themes of depression, drug use, mental illness, just all kinds of things. But it's really well written, and the music is really great. It was a cast of, I think, 6 in the whole show, and it was, I think, let's see, it was the keyboard slash music director, 2 guitars, bass, drums. I think that was it. So 5 in the pit. So, a total of, not counting, director and choreographer or other things, there's basically a dozen people that are involved. And so it was a little more, you had more chance to kind of interact, in breaks or before or after the show, which was nice for me because, it just gave me a little more insight into the people and the actors and what kind of drove them and how they arrived at their performances. But you get to some of the bigger shows where there's 15 major people and an ensemble of 30 or 40 or something. You're never going to get much time to interact with them, probably.
Mhm. Yeah. How do you find guests for your show?
I started out just like people I knew,
Yeah, me too.
um, as I'm sure most people probably do. And I think the first 4 or 5 were just people that I knew fairly well that were in different areas. Like one was a percussionist, one was a sound designer, and things that kind of made sense. And then I would ask some of those people, or other friends, like, do you know somebody that would be, interested, or that would be a good guest for something like this? And you kind of get, that next level of networking beyond the immediate people that you know. And then, you might get a follower on social media that is like, oh, I don't know this person. I wonder, who they are. And you can look at their bio, and it's like this literally happened to me one time. I noticed a new follower. I don't know, either on my Instagram or Facebook page, and I clicked on the guy's bio and looked, and it's like, oh, this guy was the monitor engineer for the Tonight Show and John Legend and Justin Timberlake, and like all these people. And I'm like, wow, that's cool that he not only listened to a show apparently, but he actually liked an episode, or was became a follower of my page or whatever. And I thought, oh, that's really cool, And at first I thought, oh, he would make a great guest, being a monitor engineer, and explaining what that is. And then, of course, that self filter kicked in, like, oh, he's, what would he want to talk to you? He's, like this big, important guy. And, after, a few days of kind of kicking it around and talking myself in and out of it, I finally just emailed him, or reached out to him, however, told him what the show was about, what I do, and why I thought he would be a good guest. And he's like, yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to. And so there's been a couple of those kind of things. And then, once you get into somebody like that, who's in a whole different circle of people, then they start to refer somebody else, or their friends hear it, because they promote their episode when they were a guest on the show, and then their friends hear that and like, oh, that, I'll start listening. And it's taken, I think it's just been over a year. Yeah, because I started December of 19. So it's taken just over a year where it's gotten to the point, it's just now starting to kind of not grow exponentially by any means, but it's not just me and 15 of my friends listening. And so it's cool to see the numbers just slowly clicking along. It's and I haven't really done any kind of promotion, or marketing, or anything, to speak of, to really grow it. And I suppose if I did that more and put more energy and money into that, I could grow it much quicker. But it feels nice just the way it's growing organically, and getting word of mouth around, to different people. So I'm happy with that. Like I said, I started the whole thing just because I was interested in this, and if other people want to hear it, that's even better. But I'm not like envisioning, retiring and making millions of dollars off of a podcast. I'm smarter than that. So, but yeah, it's fun to just find these other people. And, the biggest thing I found, honestly, is these people who are quote unquote, kind of big people in their industry. They're just like you and me. I mean,
Yeah.
they're not any different to for the most part. Yeah, they
Mhm.
live in a city with, millions more people than I do, but they still, have the same fears, the same hopes, and the same dreams, and whatever that we do. And it's just kind of a different take on it. But everybody's been very, very receptive so far that I've contacted. The people that I didn't know. And then I had one guest who he was on the show. His episode came out. He said, really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks for this, blah, blah, blah. He says, if you ever need recommendations for other guests, let me know. I'd be glad to refer a couple people. I'm like, okay, cool. This guy was a tour manager, with Earth, Wind, and Fire, and other, huge acts for, 30 some years he's been in the business. So, the guy's kind of connected. And I thought, oh, okay, that'd be great. Over the course of a couple of weeks, he sends me like 20 names, and sends an email to me and copies the person and says, so and so, meet John, this is so and so, here's their LinkedIn page, this is what they do. He's a great person. He was whatever, a sound engineer, or he was a tour manager for this or that, and it was like drinking out of a fire hose. It was just like coming at me, fast and furious, and it was great because it was at a time where I was kind of starting to lose a little momentum, I think, in the show in terms of, running lower on potential guests, and kind of losing a little bit of the passion maybe. It was that point where you're starting to think, is this, should I keep doing this or not?
Hmm.
And so that was kind of a nice shot in the arm because it gave me kind of an extra energy boost there. And all these people were just the greatest, because they were all familiar with him, and he was impressed with them enough to refer them to me. So it's been great. And I had, like I said, at least 20 or so, and about half of them I've interviewed, and the other half I'm still, kind of scheduling things and getting them out there. But I even bumped up the frequency of my shows from twice a month to 3 times a month, just to try to get, more guests going through, because I was starting to get backlog so far out that it was going to be the end of next year before I got through them all. Yeah, that's the, the way I've kind of been able to find other people. It's just kind of all over the place. So, some it's through friends, some it's through some of these random interactions, really.
Hmm. I think having a podcast is such a good self improvement project, like kind of forcing yourself to reach out to people that are maybe in a different circle, or, a perceived higher plane, not
Yeah,
plane, but like a just further along in their career than you.
right.
And yeah, I mean, I would love to say that I do it for altruistic reasons, offering free content to people. But I mean, really, at the end of every conversation, I think, wow, that was the best use of that hour that
Hmm.
I could have done with it. And so if anyone's considering, if there's anyone listening who's considering a podcast, like, just do it. It's such a good project, and I've benefited from it immensely, both in my bass playing and in just public speaking. And yeah,
Yeah,
it's a good project.
right. And that's, same with me. I was never like a super people person. I was always very technically oriented, and I loved, facts and figures, and I loved like nuts and bolts of things, and I was really good at that. But I always kind of struggled with certain interactions with people, especially if it was somebody I didn't really know. And this really kind of forced me out of that comfort zone, and got into, you got to go do some research about the person, and you got to learn a little bit about them before you start talking, and then you have to try to frame questions the right way. It forces you into all these kind of social, skills,
Hmm.
in order to deal with people and not come off like a moron. um, but and the funny thing is, most of the editing that I end up doing on my show is just to get rid of me saying stupid things, or
Yep.
stuttering, or and and that kind of stuff. So, the best podcast interviews are the ones where, you prompt somebody and they just kind of go, and you don't really have to guide them, and they kind of just give you exactly what you're hoping for in terms of their stories and their journey and their experiences. And it's just fun to hear, all that stuff that otherwise wouldn't really ever make it to the light of day.
Yeah, agreed. Great. This has been such a good conversation. I like to ask everyone the same final question. You can take it any way you want. So, advice. So, either advice to young musicians who are interested in theater, or maybe advice to people who want to start a podcast.
Well, it's kind of probably the same for either of those things, and based on kind of my own, retrospective of my life, is just do it. Don't second guess things. Don't be afraid to contact somebody to see if they need a musician. I'm so and so, I play this. I've been in the area, I know this person, that person. I know you are a music director for shows at this place, or, whatever. If you need, I'm sure you have people that you use regularly. If you need somebody else, or you need a sub, I'm available. Here's my contact, that kind of thing. Don't be afraid to reach out to people. The worst they can do is say, well, thanks, but I don't need anybody right now. But, those kind of things, you never know where they might lead. They sometimes those opportunities pop up. The biggest thing is just don't shoot yourself in the foot before you even gotten a chance to get out of the starting gate. I did a lot of things early on, and still to this day, where I kind of self-edited myself before I had the chance to really see where things went. And there's a lot of things I regretted not trying and finding out. Yeah, maybe they all wouldn't have worked out great, but you just got to go out and do it. And I mean, the biggest thing is don't be a jerk about it. Obviously, but be professional, be courteous, and be prepared. Do your homework. If you're going to contact somebody and ask for some kind of a favor or a referral or a recommendation, know something about the person and what they're doing and what their background is, if you can, so that you can be a better informed person when it comes to conveying your desires and your needs and what you can offer them, because that's really what it's about. It's a kind of a transaction. It's like, I have this that I can offer to you in exchange for maybe networking with you and the people that or whatever it is. So always try to bring some kind of value to the game, kind of the old advertising thing. Make people want something they didn't know they needed. That's the thing I try to keep in the back of my head.
The music for the backstage creative was improvised and performed by Ian Leroy, and the logo was designed by Carly Wagner.